Hello, this exercise I want to share with you is what I call the magic letter. And it's used for expressing yourself and how you're feeling towards somebody that you might want to get out, but you might not feel like you're at the point where you can actually communicate with them, or it might be the point where there's no possible way of communicating with them, and you don't want to create that friction, that tension between them, and sometimes you know what the outcome's going to be, but sometimes you still feel like you need to tell them. So this sort of letter is a way you can express yourself, you can set your boundaries, you can sort of practice setting your boundaries in advance if you do need to set boundaries with this person, or in a safe way that you can sort of that is, as I said, a safe way for you to take that next step to bridge where you need to get to in your relationships with certain people. So how this sort of came about was a few years ago. I was really upset with Amy, and I needed to get out how I felt and what I was holding on inside. But at that point in my life, I was still struggling to really communicate to her and tell her how I felt. So as I'd grown up, like showing emotion and communication of how we actually felt towards one another was something that my family didn't do. So, when I felt like I needed to communicate with Amy, I'd always freeze up, and I felt like when I needed to tell her something, it might come back to me, like she might get upset about me having certain feelings and that my feelings were wrong, and that comes back to my childhood ultimately, which I believe was sort of down to my mum not listening and not understanding not taking my feelings as my own. So what would happen is I'd avoid confrontation, at all costs, because those fear that, okay, I might be wrong, like my emotions that I'm feeling might not be correct. So instead of obviously communicating with her, I decided to write a letter because I couldn't say what I needed to feel. And for me, writing is much easier to get the words out. And I intended to give her the letter to read before I went to bed that night, but I didn't. But in the morning, I'd woke up and she'd left the letter for me. And when I read it, I was shocked, because everything in the letter that I wrote to her, she'd answered in this letter to me. And I thought she must have got in and found what I was writing to her, and was snooping around my stuff and seeing what I was writing. And I didn't believe her at first, because it was so coincidental, like what I had shared with, like what I intended to share with her. But she said, no, I didn't read it. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like it's as if you've read this letter and responded. So I never really thought much about it after that. But then about a month ago, again, I was sort of feeling hurt, and it was the same old pattern. I was struggling to communicate, and I get stuck in that way sometimes. And as I said, it all comes back down to those old childhood patterns. So I was feeling sort of hurt, and as I said, I slipped back into that old habit of not talking, not showing, not communicating how I'm feeling. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to write this letter, and I forgot about completely forgot about the first letter I wrote and how it resolved. But this time I had no intention of giving her the letter, because I just needed to, my feelings were my feelings. That's how I was seeing the situation. So I felt like I just needed to resolve it with myself and let those emotions out. So I wrote down, as if a letter to her, all the things that were annoying me at the time. Because I didn't have any boundaries set. Like that was something, as going back to kids, there was between me and my parents, there was no boundaries there. So, but when we crossed each other's boundaries, there was no communication there as well. So it was just stewing, and it was very tough for me. So what I did, obviously, I wrote the letter to Amy. As I said, I had no intention to give it to her this time, and it was so weird because the few days after, like, she didn't write me back a letter, but everything I wrote in the letter, it somehow got resolved, like, by her actions, and it's like she started talking to me about these things that were upsetting me, and resolving them, and how my emotions were feeling, and it's like it wasn't my fault. And I was like, again, I was just stunned of of what happened and how it worked, and how sort of me releasing that energy and putting that energy out there, even though I didn't communicate it with her directly, just getting that energy out resolved that sort of tension between us. So again, sort of, because it happened the second time, I sort of linked it together. I thought this might be something going on here. So like the last couple of weeks, I've been doing some really deep inner work on myself around my childhood, a lot around communication and feeling seen and heard. And I discovered from working with a new client, I was explaining a pattern I found in their life that was kept playing out related to their parents. And it actually hit me that it was a pattern that I actually hadn't uncovered myself. And a lot of time when I'm connected to clients, I'm connecting to a higher source. I'm connected to them and asking for help and guidance from a higher source. And a lot of stuff just sort of comes through me. It's not something it's always in my knowledge bank, but as I said, it's something that comes through me more than what I already know. So it's sort of, as soon as I sort of said it and it was coming out, I'm thinking, this is exactly what's happening to me, that I haven't found this pattern. So I still actually deep down felt, as much work as I've done on myself around everything, relationships, parents, etc., there was just this little part that I felt that was not free, that was controlled. And when I uncovered this, it was like uncovering some buried treasure. And I call it treasure because finding these hidden patterns can be so valuable in our healing. And this treasure was obviously really deeply buried. I buried it pretty well, and stuff from my childhood that was quite deep. And it's all, once it got uncovered, it was like all this stuff was coming to the surface. So I decided to write a letter to both my parents, one each, one to my mum, one to my dad, about how I felt hurt as a child, and that I'd be setting some new boundaries for myself around them. And because of my upbringing, I felt powerless around them. And although I've done so much work for myself, there was a deeper level that it had been waiting to be unresolved. And I don't blame my parents. They're good people. They were doing the best they can. I don't blame them for anything. They gave me as much as they can, but what they didn't give me was that how to emotional needs. They didn't meet my emotional needs. I didn't feel heard. There was no affection shown. There was no I love yous. It was I can't remember hearing I love you, or I'm proud of you, or anything like that. And I know we shouldn't need that, but when we're kids growing up, we do need that to feel safe, because as ages 0 to 7, we're very vulnerable, and even 7 through to 15, 16, we're still a little bit vulnerable. We can sort of look a bit more after ourselves, but we're very vulnerable at that young age, and we rely on our parents so much for that safety. And when our parents aren't communicating that we belong and we're loved by them, our safety feels in jeopardy. So, as I said, I decided to write the letter to them, and basically it was a letter from my wounded inner child, really. And it was something I had buried deep inside from a young age. And the letter was sort of firm, powerful, and that I'd be setting a new boundary with them, and that I was going to start being a different person, and I was going to start being my true self, even more around them. And if they didn't like it, that it's not up to me I'm not the one who's responsible for their emotions. They're responsible for their own emotions. So, as I said, I thought, no, I need to resolve this. I need to write this letter to get it out. And again, I sort of didn't have the intention to I was never going to give it to him. I just needed to get all that stuff out, because I knew how it would be responded to, and it obviously wouldn't be taken too well. But you know what? I did all that work. I set this blog post. I did all the work. I wrote the letters. I forgive them for all that went through in my childhood, and that was fine. I was done with it. And then I put a blog post out, which I did mention my parents in last week, and my mum, unbeknownst to me, had been given the news a few days prior that her sister had been set on an end-of-life plan. She'd been in a nursing home for a few years, and very unable to communicate for the last couple of years and remember who anyone was, but she'd been given a few days to live. So her emotions were running wild in her current emotional state, and when she read about her and how I felt hurt as a child, and she took that obviously to heart, and she got really upset at me. So like I sort of experienced in my life, I was like sort of I had to put out I had a sort of bit of a fire to put out. I had that confrontation that sort of my mum again couldn't honor how I felt. She took that as a attack on her, and in hindsight, it's probably hard to read as parents when you feel like your kids might be having a go at you. But as I said in the blog, I appreciate everything they've done for me, but in the end, that's how they made me feel, and I feel, as I said, going back to what I said before, I felt like as a kid, if I'd have a big emotion come up, and if I felt a certain way, I think what would happen is my mum would say, like, don't be silly, that's silly that you're feeling like that, stop feeling like that. And what happens is she would not consider my emotions, and these were my emotions, these were my perspective of the situation. So what I actually, because it obviously kept happening, what I learned to do was I learned to hold on to those emotions, because if I was to get emotional, I wasn't sure if this was the right emotion. Wasn't sure if I'd get in trouble for showing this emotion, because was it the right emotion I should be showing in that time. So I started questioning my own my own emotions that came up. So then, because I'd questioned those, I don't trust in myself. I don't feel capable of picking the right emotion. I don't trust myself to have the right emotion, and all these patterns, they start coming up. And when you look at all this down to essentially not being seen or heard by her, and not having my emotions validated by her as a child, which has led to me turning inwards and not communicating with my parents all through my childhood, not communicating with Amy, and not telling her how I feel, because I was afraid that she wouldn't validate my emotions. She'd say, I'd be like, you're just being stupid, you're making that up, and then I'd feel like my emotions are wrong, and I wouldn't feel capable of choosing the right emotions because they were wrong. So I'd fear communicating because I didn't want to make a mistake. I didn't want to pick the wrong emotions. And you see how that huge pattern just emerged from me, and it's like it hit me full on, and it was probably it was a very emotional weekend for me, and it was quite funny because I was doing a lot of work on Sunday, and it was a perfect scenario, and I was actually reflecting on parts of my childhood and growing up, and I just broke down in tears, and I just because there was so much stuff that was deep down inside that I couldn't feel. I felt like I couldn't feel and let out, that I'd suppressed. And my son came past, and he saw me crying, and which is I'm okay with. And he went in and asked Amy. He said, "Well, what's Dad crying about?" And I was supposed to play soccer that morning, but the game got called off because of the heat and not enough numbers. And he walks in and he said to Amy, "Is Dad crying because soccer got called off?" And Amy said, "No, he's crying because he's just going over some things." But our kids, that's what our kids perceive, and if we don't tell them if we don't tell them the truth, and we're not honest with them, they're going to make up their own story, and they're going to make up different things. And like my emotions as a kid, and what my mum perceived my emotions now, my perception of my childhood, she didn't think anything was wrong with it because she did everything she could, and she was right. She did everything she could. But from my perception as a kid, I was really hurt, but my emotions weren't validated by her, so I held them in, and I made my own scenarios up, because she assumed that because maybe they were giving me the roof over my head because, you know what, they let me play soccer and they drive me around to sport and they sent me to school. They assumed that was them giving them love. Like, that was their way of giving love, but they never actually showed it. They never told me that they loved me. They never told me they were proud of me. So because I didn't know, they assumed that I knew, but I didn't know because they'd never told me. So it's where we need to be honest with our kids as well. So getting back to this letter, so I wrote the letter to my parents. I put this blog post out, and because I felt very powerful once I wrote the letter. I felt, you know what, I feel super powerful. I knew it might offend them. I knew if they read it, and and you know what, it didn't care that if they did read it and they get emotional. I was no longer responsible for their emotions, regarding me. So as I said, moving on, she wasn't happy. She sent me a message and she was going through that stuff with her sister, and it sort of, it was along the lines of, how could you write such stuff about me? And again, it's not validating my own emotions. So obviously, getting back to that letter, it's sort of what I put out there with that letter and setting the boundaries. Again, it came back and, you know, it actually resolved it in a way at a physical level. It created that build up energy, and it sort of created and almost resolved a bit of that tension. It opened up the conversation between us, and it's still a work in progress, but I felt like I needed to express how I felt towards them. So again, this letter in this situation has created a situation that I had to, like, I could have went two ways in that situation. When she got offended, I could have went back and said, sorry, I'll never do it again. I promise, I'm sorry to hurt you. I'll never do it again. And I'll go back to being my own self and not setting that boundaries. But I did apologize. I said sorry for how you're feeling. And I left it at that because I knew at the time it was very tender. Her sister's about to pass away, and she did pass away over the weekend. But I thought, no, this is not the time to resolve this fully now. She's not in the emotional state to do that. So it's going to be put back in a couple of weeks. But I left it as, I'm sorry. And that's okay with me. I'm still working. I'm going to communicate when things pass over and she's back to a state where she can actually respond without being overly emotional. Then we're going to sort that situation out, and like what I wrote, and I need to express myself of how I felt as a kid, and let her know and communicate. I know it's not their fault. It's not. They were doing the best they can, and I don't blame them for that. I'm grateful for them. I love them. But if they keep denying my emotions and how I'm going to feel, I have to keep playing. I have to be somebody else that I'm not. And it comes down to, if we don't feel like we can be our true emotional, like our true selves, and show our who we are, because of our parents sometimes are getting in the way, or can be other people in our lives are getting in the way. I feel like we're under control, and we feel powerless. And when we feel powerless, we feel stressed, and that's when we start to create these injuries, illnesses that come up in our bodies because we're unconsciously stressed. So this letter is about resolving. It's helping resolve issues that we're going through. It's helping release. It's helping we're telling people energetically through this letter. And you know what? It will help you get stuff out, and you can be as brutal as you want in a letter. Don't intend to give it to them. Don't have to give it to this person. Just, it's there. It's an act as if you're telling this person what you need, how they've hurt you, okay? And it's not about putting all that down and then give it to him, making them feel bad and all that and blowing up this situation. It's write this letter. It's called the magic letter. You don't need to send it, but watch when you do send it. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the letter I wrote to my parents, just so you can see how it went and how it was set out. But just put it out there and just let it go, and start to see what sort of things resolve themselves around that situation, around it. And simply because you've just let that energy out, you've let that build up of energy, even though it's like you've said it, and whether they've heard it or not, sometimes you can actually say things and they're not going to hear it anyway. A lot of people, they don't want to hear what you've got to say. So writing this letter is a great way to get out what you need to say to them. And look, you don't have to be heard, but you just need to get out what's inside of you. And you need to practice. It's about practicing the boundary setting as well. It's like, I'm setting this boundary now. And once you set that intention to make the boundary, it's just reinforcing that. It's going to be hard, and sometimes you're going to get those boundaries broken, but it's saying, I'm setting this firm boundary, and it helps you practice. It identifies it so you know what the boundary is, and you can start practicing setting that, even if it's not talking to them, even if it's not actually communicating that boundary with them. You'll get the practice that you need to be able to set that boundary. So, as I say, give it a go. Get everything out. Pick a person that maybe it's something that you need resolving in your life, that is just really getting you down, really bugging you, and you're feeling a lot of stress over, and you just need to let it go. Write this magic letter. Write it down. Don't give it to them. Just put it out there. Release it, and you'll feel lighter just by doing it, just by getting out what you need to get out. And as I said, what you find is a lot of time it's going to start to resolve itself by itself. It's putting it out to the universe, and the universe is going to deal with that, help us deal with that problem as well. So yeah, give it a go. I'll leave a couple of examples as well for you, so you can get an idea of what's there. But yeah, have a go. There's no right or wrong. You write what you want in the letter. Be as hard as you want, because they're not gonna see it. Get as much out as you can, and see what comes about. It'd be interesting to if you do it. Sometimes you might not get the resolution, but you'll find it will make you'll feel a lot better just by getting that letter out, getting the words out of the inside of you, and getting them onto paper and releasing that. It's another way of releasing that energy that's inside you. So give it a go. Let me know how you go, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. All right, enjoy your day.